Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Scott from WarmlyYours, and that is
Anatoly.
And we are here to give you a webinar today. And I'm just working on sharing our screen now so you can see it. And there magically it appears, and it puts us down at the bottom in the lower left-hand corner. That's fine with me. And we can talk about what's going on with this presentation that we're doing today. So thank you so much for joining. It's going to be tips on how to best pair electric floor heating with luxury vinyl planks and tile. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to click on the Ask a Question section there at the bottom of your screen, and that way we can go ahead and get you in queue. And we have a lot of you today. So we've noticed that lately LVT has been very, very popular, and boom, all of a sudden our audience is very, very large concerning this topic. So hopefully we'll be giving you some information that can be useful for you today. So what we're going to be talking about today is luxury vinyl flooring with floor heating and the installation process. So instead of sitting here talking about luxury vinyl tiling and flooring, let's go ahead and start discussing what it is, how it gets put in, and all that great information. So what exactly is luxury vinyl flooring?
So luxury vinyl flooring is pretty much a broad category of resilient floorings. There's a number of these. There's planks and tiles. These types of floorings are really extremely durable. It's an ideal option for those high traffic areas, and they last for a long time. They typically last for about 25 years.
Yeah, this it's what it's constructed of. It's like it's not just one big piece of vinyl, right? It's got different layers. What are those different layers?
Yeah, so as you can even see here on the picture, that vinyl plank or tile is definitely constructed of the main core of the product. Of course, it's that vinyl backing. Then you have a color layer, the photographic film layer that gives you that look of wood, maybe like on the picture here, and a good top layer that gives that durability to the product.
Similar to the way laminate is made, but instead of having that wood core, it's got a vinyl core to it. What's the difference between planks and tiles?
So tiles would typically, the luxury vinyl tiles, of course, would typically imitate like a stone sort of surface, while planks would typically imitate the wood flooring. That's how you can see it on the picture. That photographic film layer gives you those different effects, so you can match and pick the right luxury vinyl flooring for your application, for your design.
Yeah, if you're old school like me, we used to get the 12-inch by 12-inch vinyl tiles. There's nothing luxury about that at all. It was just simply a vinyl tile that you stuck to your floor. This is a completely different animal, made kind of the same stuff with the same idea, but it's a much more luxurious type look and feel. So how does LVF compare to other types of floating floors?
So generally all of these, luxury vinyl floors and planks and tiles, and let's call it laminate, they all going to be considered as like a floating floor application. But the luxury vinyl flooring, the planks and the tiles, they are much more flexible. They're not that rigid as your traditional laminate floor. So of course, we're going to be talking about that later. The different types of product needs to be used here. Also, like the other floating floors, some luxury vinyl floors comes with like a pre-attached foam or rubber backing that helps to insulate the floor. Depending on the situation, you may want to pick the luxury vinyl flooring that will have less of that insulation, because we, of course, installing the floor heating underneath.
And the reason why that underlayment is built onto the floor is it helps keep it from sounding hollow. Well, the more padding you have, the less it sounds hollow, but the more padding you have, the more it traps the heat. So that's where you start worrying about the R value of the particular product you're putting down, because you don't want to take all this time and effort to put floor heat in and then put something on top of it that's going to keep all the heat trapped. Sure. That's the last thing you want to do. So you have to keep that in mind when you're working with LVT or LVP or however you want to call it. That's one of the things that's very important when you're talking about that. So why heat luxury vinyl tile or luxury vinyl flooring? Because it's automatically going to feel warmer than normal tile does that you would tile your bathroom with.
Right.
But what's the benefit of it?
I mean, Heating the floor, of course, gives you a number of benefits from just having the floor nice and warm, bringing more comfort to the room, bringing more warmth to the actual floor and the room. The part I also like about the luxury vinyl flooring, it's a really cost-effective flooring type. You're getting that nice look, or really any sort of look that you want for the given design, with a definitely much lower cost than maybe your traditional tile install or hardwood install. Also, it's much more durable. We talk about that. It's scuff, stain, and scratch resistant. Lasts for 20 to 25 years. That's a perfect combination for me.
And one of the great reasons that this was becoming so popular is it's waterproof or water resistant too, where we know that laminate isn't. So if you're going to be using this in a room where you may get some, like if you wash your dog in this particular floor or whatever, that's a good combination for that. And also, why would you heat luxury floor or luxury vinyl tile flooring? Because when you're walking on the vinyl, it doesn't feel as cold as tile, but that doesn't mean that heat's getting into the room. It simply just doesn't feel as cold on your feet. If you want to get the warmth actually into the room and make the room feel warm, just not having your feet not feel cold, there's a difference between that. And that's why we're going to be talking about actually heating the room. One of the big differences when it comes to LVT versus laminate, even though people think, okay, they're both floating floors, they both get installed the same way, they don't. Let's talk about the reason why we use what products we use and the reasons why we don't use other products.
For sure. That's, I think, our kind of top question these days, anytime when it comes to like a general floating floor installation. And floating floors, like we said before, can be laminate, can be luxury vinyl tiles. And the luxury vinyl tile combination, just because it's more flexible, it's a vinyl backed product. We don't want to use that over the EnvironFlex roll system, just because we want to have that flooring installed on a nice flat surface. And that can be accomplished with one of our TempZone products, like TempZone FlexRoll or TempZone Cable. That heating product is installed first, then it's embedded in the self-leveling cement, giving you a nice flat surface for the flooring installation.
You'll see that if you look at the instructions, I know most people just take the instructions and throw them away as soon as they come in. But a lot of times you'll see LVT, because it's more flexible, has a much more rigid installation requirements about flatness. So the particular floor that you're putting it on sometimes has to be even flatter than you would with a laminate, because laminate is very rigid and it will kind of hide any imperfections. LVT, the vinyl, will follow those imperfections.
Right.
So that's one thing you want to watch out for. And if you put an underlayment out in the middle of a room or under the flooring, then you put Environ in the middle of the floor, and then you put the vinyl product over it, maybe you could see a little hump in the floor, and you don't want to see that. So that's why we talk about doing this kind of installation, and also because of some warranty stuff that we'll get into later. We had a good question from Matthew. Is there a system of heating vinyl floors that would not require a skim coat over the heating elements? I think the answer to that is not really.
Definitely no. Yeah. I mean, you want to have that nice flat surface, just like Scott said a second ago.
Yeah, two reasons. You don't want to telegraph any floor imperfections to the top surface where you can actually see a hump. And also the installation instructions may require a completely flat surface, and that would rule out using the Environ system. Another question from Brian, are there radiant heat systems that would work for a floating installation? And I think that's kind of like Environ, the same. I think it's just a rewording of the other question.
Yeah, that sounds like just like that similar question, the previous one.
Yeah, so if you're driven by the product you want to heat with, let's say that you say, I want to heat this with an Environ FlexRoll because it's easier, then what you simply have to do is change your option from LVT and go over to laminate or engineered wood or something like that that you can use over the Environ FlexRolls or the Environ Easy Mats. So that may be a case where you just want to switch your flooring, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the calls that I'm getting a lot as well. Is sometimes people would buy specific Environ product because they installed it before, they loved it, that it's really easy to install, but they want to pair it up with the final flooring, and that's where we would always recommend it's just better to go with the laminate. Of course, that's the product that matches up with Environs.
Exactly. And Environ works great with carpet, but that's a whole nother webinar, right? So what do you want to look for when you're adding radiant heating to vinyl?
So first of all, we need to find that ideal balance between the having the backing or no backing, or maybe that optimum level of it. Because like we mentioned before, we don't want to have too much of the R value. So we don't want to stop that heat from transferring to your floor. But of course, there's almost going to be no product with no backing at all, or very minimal one. But we want to find that sort of ideal balance, maybe that minimal backing that will just give you a good flooring performance, but still give you a good heat transfer, and you will enjoy that nice temperature, that warm floor that you have.
The one thing about, remember, we talked about the backing of the product itself. With this backing and the product itself, you were looking for an R value of less than 1. That's what you want to look for. You also want to check the warranty requirements of the flooring. And if you see the words embedded heat, that means you're going to be installing it with the temp zone product under self-leveling. So that's what the embedded heat means. It means something embedded in cement. And that's primarily what we're going to be talking about today. Now, I've walked across some of these vinyl floors, and usually, as we talked about a couple of slides ago, is the backing. A lot of the times the backing is there to make it not sound so hollow.
Right.
Well, since you're installing it on a completely flat surface, you don't have to worry about floor imperfections. And the hollow sound usually comes from the area where there's a little divot in the subfloor, and the product is sitting flat over it, and you've got that little divot. And when you hit that one spot, it may sound hollow. Well, when you are working with this product, you're going to have a completely flat floor. So you're going to be minimizing that hollow sound. And also that is going to be something that you're going to look for too. R value, embedded heat requirements. So always check and see what your R values are and see what your warranty requirements are for that particular product. So let's take a look at this rigidity comparison. Now, these are just for illustrative purposes only. And you may notice that, wow, that one at the top really bends. That's vinyl. You know, some of the vinyls are not very rigid. And that would be a case where it would be very difficult to install that over an Environ system. So just keep in mind that the middle one says cork backing, but you may get some that are foam just because they're thicker or more rigid. Because it's cork doesn't mean it bends less. I just want to get that across. It just was for this illustration picture. That's the one we grabbed, and that's what it did. So just keep in mind that you are going to have some rigidity problems. And the one that this is being compared to is a piece of laminate. So that one in the back is a laminate. And then we're comparing those other planks to the laminate plank. So let's talk about, this is the big one. People always ask, the installation process. So what exactly needs to be done when you're installing this product?
So first of all, we really want to know all of those details. We definitely want to avoid any kind of misconception and maybe designing the project for the floating installation or thinking it's going to be a laminate floating installation, while in reality it's going to be any sort of vinyl product. So we always want to be as specific as possible when it comes to discussion about what flooring material, what flooring type will be used. So we can, of course, then quote the right product. And of course, we want to know what's the heated area will be, what's the floor plan. That's our typical quick turnaround on the projects like that. We just need that simple floor plan. Show us the heated area. We're gonna get back to you with the installation plan that shows the right product, and it shows the actual installation layout plan.
Yeah, and historically, I mean, this vinyl thing is like the last couple of years has become really, really big. And if you look historically, whenever anybody would say to us, I want to put in a floating floor, it was automatically, we would say, okay, then you're looking for our Environ system for floating floors. That is changing now. So you can't just assume when you tell us, you can't just say, I want to install a floating floor. You need to take that further step and go, I am looking to install a floating vinyl floor, because that is going to affect the product that we recommend for that particular floor. So you make sure you tell us, hey, not just floating, but floating vinyl. So let's talk about the subfloor preparation. What do you need to worry about when the subfloor, when you're using self-leveling?
So when you're using self-leveling, one of the steps is definitely you want to prime that surface first. You want to make sure that you use the recommended primer by your self-leveling manufacturer. So you prime it first for a good cement bond with the surface. You will see here on the picture there are a few spots where the sections of the floor are taped. That's where we want to cover any of the holes or cracks or any spots where the self-leveling may just kind of pour into. And generally, if we're talking about maybe some older homes or older installations or older, again, houses or projects where the floor is uneven, you don't want to install the floor heating system and then level out the floor. You want to level the floor first, then you want to install the product, and then do that final embedded system, the final layer of the self-leveling to install your flooring.
Yeah, when you're installing this, and also there's one more thing we missed, excuse me, and that is if you look here, you're going to see a white line that goes all the way around the baseboard and all the way around the door jamb. That's a bead of caulk that keeps the self-leveling from running down the walls too. You have to remember this stuff is looking to get to the lowest possible spot, and that lowest possible spot may be the basement below this floor. That's where it's trying to get. So you want to keep it in the room. So you're going to have to do this and you're going to have to do that. Now, when you're putting the product down, keep in mind self-leveling is very, very dense. Any product that you're going to be using with our heating mat that's very, very dense, the heating product is not as dense as that self-leveling, and it's going to try to float to the top. Well, that's a good way to get a really bad installation that we've heard some horror stories about people who did not attach the flooring, attach the heating to the subfloor, and it floated up to the top. And then what they had to do was then install another layer of self-leveling to then put it on top of that. So very, very important that you really adhere the system to the subfloor. And people say, hey, do I need to use primer on my floor? Look at the bag of the self-leveling that you're buying. The self-leveling bag will say requires primer, and here's the type of primer you want. So make sure that you read that bag, because if it says primer needed, then you need to get the type it's telling you to use. So here we go with the Tepsone Flex Roll, and you can see it's not sticking down to the floor, is it? Now, did we, one thing I want to point out that if you notice in this slide, this is a slide where we have the primer put on the floor. And here is the slide where we have the product put on top of the primer that's put on top of the floor. You want to put the primer on the subfloor first, then the heating product.
Right, right.
So what are we doing here?
So here is our sort of typical, very popular Tepsone Flex Roll installation. That's our main product, the fastest product to install here. And in this image, we actually sort of dry fitting the product first to just position it, making sure it's cut and turned right. And it's a one long roll that you just cut and turn, making sort of a U-turn combination here. And you're not cutting the wire, of course, you're just cutting the mesh. And the product is just really, we position it right. In the future pictures, we'll show you the image where it's actually being hauled onto the subfloor. But you will notice that the wire here is right under the mesh. So as long as you attach the mesh nicely to the subfloor, that wire will not float up, it will not curl up on the sides, and that will give you the good positioning of the system.
So one thing that a lot of beginners, one of the mistakes that beginners make when they're doing cuts and turns is they will put the mat on the floor, attach it, then roll it out, attach it, then do a cut and turn, attach it, run it back, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, I've got too much or I've got too little. Then they've got to go and start peeling it up off the floor. The secret is, as Anatoly said at the beginning, is you do your cuts and turns and just dry fit it. You just sit it there and make sure that it fits, because before you attach it is the time to make all your motions. Get this part over here, get this part over there. Remember, you want the heat where the people's feet will be. That's why we don't see any heat over here, because no one walks in there. And that's a closet, so you can't heat a closet anyway by National Electric Code. But you'll see that the product doesn't go right up against the wall. There's some space there. And we don't put it right up against the wall usually because no one stands there. It's a different story if you're using the product as a primary source of heat. But once again, do not cut the cable. Speaking of cable, here's Tepsone cable. And what are we doing here? We can see, oh, there's some distance over here too, isn't there?
Yeah, so this is our different type of product that can easily be used for that application. That's just a temp zone cable. That's generally speaking, it's the same type of heating element that comes just in the form of a cable, just a simple spool of cable that you use in a combination of the plastic fixing strips that are sort of on one side, on both sides of the room, and you just shrink that cable at the required spacing based on our installation plan layout. You attach that cable, you maybe run some runs of tape over it just to hold it in place, again, to avoid any floating of that cable to the top. And
Yeah,
then,
like every 2 or 3 feet. And
Yeah.
it's just cheap masking tape. Once you get it all laid out, put masking tape every 2 to 3 feet over this, and that'll hold that cable down and keep it from floating. If you don't use the tape to hold it, it's just going to go right up to the top of the pour. Also, one of the great things about our heating cable is it actually has a mark on the cable where the halfway point is. So when you're working off of a smart plan, you'll know exactly where your halfway point is supposed to be because it's shown on the plan. So if the plan shows that the white mark is supposed to be here in the middle of the floor and you're all the way over here, you've used too much cable. And if it's all the way over here, you've used not enough cable.
Right.
So that's a great thing. If you have a smart plan, there's going to be a dot on the smart plan that shows you where the halfway point is. So that's what's so great about the cable. Also, one other thing about the cable that never gets mentioned is it has a marking every foot and it tells you how many feet are left on the spool. So if you go, oh, I have a 10-foot run, and you look on the cable and it says 10 feet, it's perfect. It's going to fit perfectly. So that's another great thing about this product. We did have a question about the limitations of a 10 amp circuit. Personally, I've never seen a 10 amp circuit. I don't know what that means. I'm guessing that you have 10 amps available on the circuit as a possibility. What are the pros and cons of using the system as a primary heat source? Well, when you're doing a primary heat source, you want to use as much cable in the room as you can. Okay. Yeah. Now, if you've got a limitation of how many amps you can use, then automatically that's going to tell you, I need a system that fills the room, but I've got an electrical requirement that says I can only use part of the room. So there's a big disconnect in what the reality is and what you're wanting to do. So tell us the difference between 120 volts and 240 volts, how they could maximize that.
Yeah, so 120, 240, kind of a common question. Sometimes there is a misconception that 240 is more effective or more efficient, but in a floor heating type product, that's just not true. The 120 and 240 volt product will heat up at the same rate. If it's a flex roll product, for example, it will be just 15 watts per square foot. Doesn't matter if it's 120 or 240. And in this particular, based on that example in the question here, if let's just say we have a 10 amp circuit, which we can, let's say, load up to only 80%, there will be about 960 watts because we know our product is 15 watts per square foot, which as a result will mean that you can do 64 square feet in a 120 volt configuration. However, if you would switch to a 240 volt configuration, or if it's available as an option for that 10 amp circuit, then you can actually double your square footage because now you can cover 128 square feet.
That's the only benefit of 120 over 240 or 240 over 120 is simply the amount of space you can cover. They both heat the same, as Anatoly said. There is no benefit to going 240 unless you're getting into big areas. So that was a great question. Thank you for asking that. Let's go on to the next one. So let's take a look at this cross section. What are the layers here that we have on the screen?
So these are the layers that we kind of already cover in multiple slides, because this is, for me personally, this is that most important part of the installation, that if the flooring type requires the system to be embedded, or simply that's the right product for it, you want to have that subfloor first, primed, heating product installed. In our case, it's a temp zone flex roll product installed, taped, attached in few spots to prevent any of that cable kind of curling up or floating to the top. Self-leveling cement is put in, luxury vinyl tiles or planks will go on the very top.
And the fast way to install the product is just simply staple through the mesh. Never ever staple over the wire or the lead wire or anything like that. But if you staple quite often between the mesh, that'll keep it from floating. So let's talk about a floor sensor. One of the great benefits of electric floor heating over hot water heating is that we can actually keep the temperature of the floor if you decide to do so. And that's going to lead to another question that we had from Joseph. This floor sensor slide is going to talk about expansion and contraction, because as the floor heats, it expands, and as it contracts, it shrinks. As it heats up, it gets bigger, and as it cools off, it gets smaller. So the great thing about radiant heat, electric radiant heat, is the thermostat will keep it at the same temperature all the time if you want it to. So let's talk about what the sensor is and why it's so important. So what is that the sensor there?
That's the sensor. So in the sort of round picture there, that's just how the sensor comes, and it comes complementary in the thermostat box. So it comes with every thermostat that we supply, which a great point, because sometimes maybe the heating product arrives first on the installer, or something like that happens. You want to locate that thermostat box, because that's where the sensor is. That's where you need to use it during the installation process. You don't want to just install the heating mat and then the next day electrician comes up to install the thermostat and he finds the sensor. You don't want that to happen. But yeah, the temperature floor sensor is a very sort of vital part of the installation here, especially for the luxury vinyl flooring, because you will find a number of manufacturers indicating specifically what's the maximum temperature limit is, what potentially a minimum temperature limit is, what's your sort of heating time, or how quickly you can increase the temperature of the floor. All of those limitations are typically on the flooring manufacturer instruction, and you really want to follow those. But like Scott mentioned earlier, the thermostat, when it's connected to the floor sensor, can give that floor heating system a constant temperature. It can maintain that constant temperature. So if that's what's required by the manufacturer, our system can easily do that.
Yeah, it'll keep. So the one thing with this product is, whenever you have products that snap together, heating and cooling, heating and cooling, heating and cooling, they expand and contract. If you want to minimize that, you can either, like if your comfort level is 84 degrees, let's say that the manufacturer says, okay, you can turn this up to 84. If you want to minimize the contraction or expansion, you have 84 all the time. If you want to make the situation more complex, you can go from using what we call a setback temperature. Then you have a temperature of 84 or 85, whatever the maximum is mentioned by the manufacturer. Then if you're using tile, you can go from 85 down to 70 or 85 down to 65 to save money when no one's on it. Well, you don't have to worry about tiles expanding and contracting like you do this product. So you may want to experiment in your own home and say, hey, let's try to do a setback temperature, maybe 5 degrees lower to save some money. Well, then what you'd want to do is, after a few days of that, see if you're getting any gapping in the planks. But since it's floating, it should minimize that. So you want to watch out for that. So that's just a word to the wise. If you don't want any expansion, contraction at all, you set it for 84 and leave it there all winter. So let's go back to the slide before, because we had a question about this cutaway, and looks like it's from Gwen. Hi, Gwen. I'm going to click on this mysterious button here. And what is the average height that is used with this method between the subfloor and the bottom of the actual flooring? This is usually said in the instructions. And what is that usually?
So in our instruction, we want our product to cover it with at least 3/8 of an inch of that self-leveling material. However, the flooring manufacturer instruction sometimes may specifically indicate what's that amount of embedded material, or in other words, what's the distance between maybe the heating element and the flooring manufacturer wants to be. So it's always good to, of course, follow our recommendation, our requirements for that installation, and then kind of confirm and run it by the flooring manufacturer.
So 3/8 of an inch usually.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll say 1/2 inch. So you're simply following what the instructions are with the product. So Gwen, thank you for asking that question. That was a great one. So let's go back and forge ahead. Oops, I have to hit the magic button. I'm sorry. All right, there we go. Let's talk about embedding. Just like Gwen asked, how deep does it have to be embedded? So let's go ahead and we've got the product down on the floor. We've seen the cross sections, what they look like. Now what do we do?
So this is actually the image from that same installation that we had before, where we positioned, kind of dry fit the system. Now the system, the heating mat, you can see how nice and flat it lays down because the mesh was attached to the subfloor. That's why it's nice and flat. No wires are curling up. the self-leveling is being poured. And that's a perfect slide. That's where we say we want the system to be covered with 3/8 to maybe half an inch layer. That's perfect enough to embed the wire and give that sort of thermal mass to the system.
So the temp zone flex roll is pictured here. And if you notice, when we were laying this out, we always pull it taut because you don't want it real lumpy. You want it to be nice and tight. So once you get it in place and you're ready to go, you attach it from one end. So you attach the one end, and then you pull it, attach it, pull it, attach it. So it's always taut. So that's the secret to installing that particular product. As you see, what the second bullet point was actually talking about the cable that we showed in the other thing. We were going to put tape over that to hold it down. So now we can actually start installing the floor. That looks like a pool table there. It's so nice and smooth. So what do we do at this point? Now that the self-leveling is down, what do we have to wait for?
So first of all, yeah, you definitely want to wait for that self-leveling cement to dry to the approved manufacturer specs. And when we say that, we actually want you or your installer to follow those flooring company manufacturer spec. This is the part where you really now want to rely and follow the flooring company manufacturer's specifications or installation requirements, because you want to make sure it's dry, the self-leveling is dry to the right level, that sometimes the flooring company will specify that the flooring need to be indoors or at a specific temperature for a number of days. So it kind of follows those acclimation schedules. Moisture levels needs to be kept. That's where you really, we typically don't specify that in our installation manual, because that's really, you follow those specific flooring company requirements and make sure that flooring is installed correctly.
They'll also tell you if the floor has to be a certain temperature the day you install it. They may say the floor has to be 68, or they may have to say that the floor can't be on for 24 hours in advance, whatever. They'll tell you what the moisture level should be and how long the heating system should be on or off, and at what temperature it should be on or off when you're doing the installation. So let's go on to we did have one other part of that question. What's the practical upper limit on the temperature for LVT? That is what the manufacturer says.
Sure.
You follow what they say. Some will say 84, some will say 85, some will say 80. Whatever they tell you is the number. That's not up for us to tell you.
And the good part, our thermostats, most of our thermostats would actually have a setting where you can set up that maximum temperature limit. Most of the time it's called a floor protection limit. So if you know your flooring manufacturer specified that the floor should never go above 84 degrees, you can easily set that up on the thermostat, and this way you know that even if somebody dialed that temperature up by mistake or so, the thermostat will not allow that floor to go that high.
Now, Joseph also had another part of a great question. Is there the same danger of element burnout under furniture or rugs that has been warned about with tile? Well, the first thing, it's a common sense thing. You just spent a bunch of money on flooring. You just spent a bunch of money on electric heat. The last thing you want to do is cover it all up with a rug. That's not the idea, because the rug traps heat. So and it doesn't, after it gets warmed up, it will give off heat. But the thing with LVT or laminate or carpeting is, if you really never want to put something over the top of it that's got like a boxed bottom, you never want to put anything over it like a hamper or a dog bed, anything that can trap a lot of heat, anything like those big vinyl chairs, beanbag chairs. Those things are notorious for trapping heat. And sometimes it's not about causing the system to burn out. It's about 3 years later, 5 years later, whatever it is, you decide to move your couch over to the other wall, and now you look at it, and now the area under the couch where it was may be discolored. So you have to watch out for that too. So you don't want to trap heat. And the best way to stay away from that is stay away from boxed bottom furniture. And if you have furniture that has legs and the dust ruffles, you want to make sure the dust ruffles are high enough that lets air ventilate under that product. So if you're going to all this trouble, minimize the amount of the area covered with a rug, minimize the thickness of the rug, make it thinner if you can, avoid foam backed rugs, anything that can trap heat, really thick padded rugs, you want to stay away from those. So that's the idea is you went to all this trouble, don't cover it all up. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So that was a great question, Joseph. And if you do put something on there and it overheats, yes, you do have a higher chance of the system burning out if you put something over the top of it. That's why we normally don't, like, if let's say that this room had a bookcase. Last thing you want to do is put heat under the bookcase, because the bookcase is never going to move, and it could be considered a permanent fixture. You cannot heat under permanent fixtures anyway, according to the National Electric Code. So it's just those sort of things you want to keep in mind. Put the heat where people's feet will feel it, and don't cover it up and trap the heat. So let's talk about the benefits of this installation type. The benefits of just taking heat and covering it with self-leveling.
Yeah, that's the part I like a lot. Even knowing that the lecture vinyl flooring lasts for a number of years. With a
It lasts for a number of years. That doesn't mean it's going to look great for a number of years.
Right. And knowing that your heating system is fully embedded in self-leveling cement, just like you can see on the right side of that picture, and it's a click together flooring combination, you can easily take that flooring up and install a new one. Your heating system is covered, and it's just a nice flat surface that is already heated. So you can work with, changing your flooring time when you decide to do it.
Mm-hmm. So if you decide, hey, polka dots look fantastic this year, 3 years from now, you go polka dots. Why in the world did we choose polka dots? You just lift it all up and put a new surface down. You could even do carpeting over this too, if you wanted to.
Sure.
So there's a whole bunch of, it's like a blank slate of flat heated floor. And what it does is it takes a room that was cold and you're putting heat in it, and you can choose to cover it however you want to. Do we have any questions over what we've talked about? I know there's been a lot of interest in this topic. We get phone calls about this stuff all the time, and hopefully we can kind of dispel what your preconceptions are when it comes to using LVT as opposed to laminate, and why laminate and LVT are completely different products when it comes to heating them. While we're waiting for you to think of some questions, feel free to type them in there. We do have some questions that were supplied to us ahead of time. One of them is from Aaron. Do you recommend insulating under the subfloor where the flooring will be heated?
And yeah, you definitely want to insulate when the system is installed over concrete, or generally maybe over any unheated surface below. So in other words, if your subflooring will be cold, you want to insulate, you want to create that thermal break. We provide the products like Cork and Cerazorb that are great insulator. They are great underlayment systems. And yes, you want to insulate. That gives your floor heating part that good performance, quick heating time, and a good temperature.
Yeah, and if you're going to be using self-leveling like we're showing here, you want to make sure that you use the Cerazorb product instead of Cork. It's a little more forgiving when it comes to adhering to the subfloor and that sort of thing. So that's a great question, Aaron. Thank you so much for supplying that. And we have another question from Steve. And can electric floor heat be used as a primary heat source?
The answer to that is we don't know, because you really need to go over a heat loss calculation. It all really depends at this point from how well the room is sealed, or maybe that room or house is sealed, because we want to find out how much heat escapes, how much heat is being lost. And if that number is 3,000 BTUs, but our system can provide 4,500 BTUs, we know it's going to cover that heat loss most likely for these even colder days of the winter. But if it's maybe an older construction, it's not well insulated, and it's like literally losing 4,000 BTUs, and our system can provide, with a full coverage, it can provide only 2,000. You need some additional supplemental heat source to fully cover that heat loss.
Yeah, the thing you want to do is keep a general thing in mind, that there are certain things that you can put in a room that lead to heat loss. The more of them you have, the more heat loss you have. So let's say you have a house that was built in 1910 with no insulation. In that room, there's 2 skylights. Those are heat loss monsters. They chew up heat loss. They create heat loss. So in addition to those 2 skylights, you have three exterior walls. Those are heat loss monsters. Then in each one of those walls, you have large framed single pane windows.
Right.
In one of those walls, you have a door that goes to the outdoors. All these things are things that would lead you to believe, oh, there's a lot of heat loss going in this room. Exterior windows, exterior walls, unheated garage space below, and no heated area above. All those items that require a lot of BTUs to make it feel warm. Remember, we can only supply so many BTUs, so that's where the heat loss calculation is going to go. If you have a house that was built yesterday and there's no exterior walls, there's no exterior windows, you don't have any skylights, you have a heated kitchen below, and you've got a heated bedroom above, that's a really good candidate for primary source of heat, simply because there's not a lot of heat loss. So you can see the two differences there I'm talking about. A brand new house in a certain type of room, or a really old house with another type of room. They really make a big difference. So there really is no answer to that question, Steve, until you do your heat loss calculation. But that's a great question. We get that all the time. So,
and I think what I just want to add real quick to that is in that combination where we have a really high heat loss, we know the system, if it's installed right, the floor heating going to work 100%. It's going to run maybe nonstop because it's trying to heat and it's trying to give as much heat as possible. And the floor should stay warm if it's all installed right, but it's just the amount of room temperature that we cannot kind of get that room temperature up to the level we want.
It's acting as a supplemental heat source at that point. It just can't overcome the BTU
It's
loss.
trying, but it just doesn't have that much power because heat loss is winning, sort of.
Right, exactly. So those are all the questions we have. So I hope that you got something positive out of this. This is all, I mean, these are the questions that we get all the time here at Warmly Yours. We try to bake them into this to try to keep you from having, oh, I wonder if we can do that, or I wonder if we should do that. That's why we do these things. So please join us for our next webinar, which is going to be how to build an instant snow melting quote online. That's going to be Thursday, March 14th at 1 p.m. That's Central Time. And we also have a monthly promotion this month, and that is the February sale of 25% off Metropolitan Towel Warmers. That's through the 28th. You've got 14 days to get that done. And you can visit warmlyyours.com for more information. So, as we said, we construct these things from the questions we ask. We're always looking for ideas. So if there's something that you are going, boy, I wish somebody would talk about this, or I wonder how they do that, or should we do this, or should we do that? That's the kind of stuff we want to know, because then we can do a webinar about that and make it at least, something that people are looking, give the people what they want, as they say. You'll receive an email shortly asking about your experience for this webinar and whether you enjoyed it, whether you enjoyed Anatoly and I. We won't take it personally if you say, hey, I couldn't hear them because they weren't loud enough. But that's all right. Just let us know what you think, because we do appreciate your comments and suggestions. So let us know what you thought of this one. Let us know if it looked good on your screen, if it didn't look good, if you could hear us, if you couldn't. All that stuff is very, very good information. And the way to contact us otherwise is you can contact us 800-875-5285. We're always there. You can email us, and you can check us out on the internet. And that's probably where you're checking us out right now. It's the interwebs. So thanks so much for watching. And we hope that we gave some good information today. So until we see you next time, stay warm
and be radiant.
Bye now.